Madam Chair, in a time of recession, basically this is what the status quo is. What happens during recession is this. The economy is bad. Basically, the economy is not sustaining due to the fact that inflation is happening, due to the fact that people do not know the extent of their buying power, and thus they choose to save rather than spend during times of recession, and thus the economy doesn't grow, but instead spirals down into this mess that that happens in society itself. By people not spending in itself, they cause the economy to continue to spiral down into that shithole that it is today. So what is basically, Madam Chair, what is our mechanism for today's debate? What is our mechanism to solve this problem? We are going to make sure that we tax the people with above average income, the people that make more than what the national average of national average income in the state itself. We're going to tax them about 10% of whatever they save in a bank, because they fail to actually spend, they fail to actually use their buying power to help generate the economy. Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, we're going to also make sure that we do not capitalize on unemployed people, because at the end of the day, we respect that they do not have as much buying power as the people who are employed. Thus, we do not want to tax them, Madam Chair. And what we're going to take from that tax is we're going to choose to use that tax, Madam Chair, to actually subsidize things, the products, the economy itself. We're going to subsidize prices of various products to make sure that inflation is restricted, to make sure that inflation in itself stops at a certain point. So, Madam Chair, no thank you. Madam Chair, what is basically the main points that's coming from side government? We're going to talk to you about the government's role, the top 1% in the nation itself, and my second speaker to you will speak to you more about the economy and the buying power of the citizens themselves. So basically, Madam Chair, what is the role of the government? What is the role of the state? Basically, the role of the state is to be a parental figure in society, to make sure they monitor over every aspect, every aspect of society itself. They monitor over our education, our healthcare, most importantly, they monitor over our economy, Madam Chair. So why do they benefit from such a mechanism, such an implementation of a policy? Because when we implement our policy, when we implement our model, we can make sure that the government benefit when they can actually have more power, more money to actually subsidize prices of things such as cars, such as property itself. Because we can see from examples such as the 2008 bubble, Madam Chair, is that prices of real estate skyrocketed to a point that the people couldn't actually start to afford because they were too afraid to spend in the first place. So our mechanism can stop this by actually helping, by actually taking away the savings of what the people chooses to not spend, and actually use it on benefiting society itself by subsidizing things such as things such as petrol in Malaysia, when you see this government actually subsidize, and thus we as the people actually benefit more. So, Mr. Speaker, why does the government want to do this, and how does the government benefit from such a thing? No, thank you. Because the economy is maintained. What we do not want to happen, what their paradigm will actually exist, is that the economy doesn't maintain, it doesn't sustain to a point that actually people can live in, people can actually afford the things that is happening in the economy itself. When we can make sure that the economy is maintained at this level, inflation will maintain at this level, we can make sure that people can actually start to afford. We can actually make sure that the people are they're less cautious to spend more, and thus when these people spend more, the economy, the recession stops, and the GDP of the country, because basic economics, you spend more, your GDP increases, your economy benefits. So at the end of the day, this will cause a decrease in unemployment, a decrease in companies actually laying off their workers, something which my second speaker will deal more upon, because we can see in the Great Depression, where the government actually took a stand to try to stop the economy. These banks gathered up to try to stop the outcome of the Wall Street crash by using up to like $250 million and spending it in the stock market, buying the prices of the stocks above what they're actually valued, and this actually helped maintain the level of the economy, maintain the value of the stocks themselves during that crisis to a certain level where they felt safe, they felt okay. But however, this did not the spiral continued to happen because people, even though when the prices were maintained, no thank you, prices were maintained by the banks, the people still didn't want to spend, and thus the economy actually decreased, Madam Chair. So another thing I'm going to talk to you about today is the wealthy people in these countries, the top 1% of such a thing, of certain countries in Western liberal democracies, Madam Chair. Because in Western liberal democracies, such as the United States, we can see a relatively wide gap of the rich and the poor, where the 1% is separated from the 99% of the society itself. What these top 1% can are actually doing in times of recession is basically they're not spending as much. They're choosing to save, and even in times of recession, they have the least to lose. They have nothing because they already have so much money that whatever recession doesn't actually harm them. Mark Zuckerberg himself, in Facebook's economic downfall, even at the end of the day, when Facebook lost half of its IPO and whatnot, he still walked away at the end of the day with $9 billion in his pocket. So at the end, so basically, Ma'am Chair, no thank you, these wealthy people can exist in times of expansion, and thus we want them to spend more, not actually save up on the billions of dollars they actually have. Before I move on, yes.
Okay, sir. Under the case where the people's income is above average and they spend a lot, will you still tax their savings?
Well, if they choose to sell, the fact that they're saving is due to the fact they're not actually spending, and thus we still would tax them. Why wouldn't we? We want them to spend at the end of the day, because we want them to spend more to help generate the income, which in turn will help benefit them. So moving on to my point on the wealthy speaker, Madam Chair, is that we can capitalize on these wealthy people, because in the status quo of today, these wealthy people, as much taxes as it is imposed on them, they are still not giving back as much to society. The government is not capitalizing on the fact that they have billions of dollars, they have millions of income that can help generate the economy by actually taxing more. But because they can actually spend their income to help generate, whether they choose to give it to charity or not, they can actually spend it. By them not actually spending it, they do not actually help the economy benefit. They do not actually help the government in itself and as well as society, and in turn, the economy continues to spiral down. And so the government can actually tax these top 1% people and actually get more money, and thus can actually subsidize more things and help the society grow in itself, Madam Chair. So what have I talked to you about today? I've talked to you about our mechanism, our module, which will in turn, Madam Chair, actually help society itself. We capitalize on the people who chooses not to spend, who chooses not to acknowledge their buying power, and chooses to in turn not actually help the economy and themselves. And I'll also talk to you on the role of the government and how they are responsible to make sure that they create the best possible scenario in status quo. And I'll also talk to you about how we as a government can actually capitalize on the top 1% of society, the wealthy people, in turn helping the greater amount of people, causing the greater amount of good. Thank you.
Yeah. We don't think the government side actually came out with a very, very good mechanism to show how effective their mechanism to begin with. We think, Mr. Speaker, when the problem addressed by the government side today is about how if inflation, people don't spend and money circulation don't work or whatsoever, we think that this kind of scenario already self-regulatory in nature. Why? We tell you, number one, because the people are spending according to their needs and according to what they want or whatsoever. So this kind of thing, Mr. Speaker, already self-regulatory in nature and doesn't need government to intervene in the first place. We think that when the people already have the buying power, or when you are wealthy or whatever, you will always buy FMCG or whatsoever that will actually benefit you in the end of the day. We don't think that, Mr. Speaker, when you have a lot of money, then you will just save forever and you won't use your money. That's ridiculous to begin with. And what actually fails, what actually my third speaker actually PI them, but how is the people actually already spend a lot of things, will you actually tax them at the end of the day? And they say that, Mr. Speaker, they assume that these people doesn't spend in the first place. We tell you no, these people already spend in the first place, so we don't think that, Mr. Speaker, it's justified for you to actually come up and suddenly tax them, Mr. Speaker. And what actually they're talking about the government role or whatsoever, right? But they will be clashing with my argument also about the state role. How is state actually supposed to help the people, not about to take the people money or whatsoever. That will be elaborated more. Before that, yes.
You said that people spend, but in this debate we're talking about recession, and these when recession occurs, people actually don't spend their money. So how can your point stand?
Yes, we agree that, Mr. Speaker, but now let me characterize to you what recession is and how it will affect the people. Number one, Mr. Speaker, when recession happens, it's always because of the government, Mr. Speaker. It's not because of the people. People don't actually damage the economy or whatsoever. We don't think it's actually will work that way. And we think that, Mr. Speaker, when the recession happens, everyone will be affected. Not government only. People will also face the high price of things or whatsoever. So this kind of people already be affected in the first place. We don't think we should tax them more. And second, that, Mr. Speaker, we told you that this kind of government already have check imbalances to begin with. Like they can borrow loans from IMF and World Bank, Mr. Speaker, to actually solve the recession. And they also they already have a lot of taxes, and people and the IMF can give you bailout if you really need of money, Mr. Speaker. So we think that under these circumstances where they actually government have the capacity and more power than the people, we should actually put the people into the picture to actually make you solve your own problem because you don't actually do your best, right? But we think that, Mr. Speaker, under circumstances, government still haven't do their best to actually solve the recession. Why? Number one, we tell you, for example, if the Greece, how actually they want to increase their economy by actually invest on tourism, but it doesn't work that way, right? Because when recession comes, people don't even come to their country to visit their beach or whatsoever. So in those circumstances, it's the government fault, Mr. Speaker. People don't actually ask the government to actually invest on this kind of tourism or high risky investment in the first place. For example, in Ukraine, right, how they actually borrow money a lot from Russia or whatsoever. So in those circumstances, people don't actually ask the government to actually borrow the money or whatsoever. We don't think that is justified. And secondly, how we told you about this kind of government actually spend too much on unnecessary things, for example, on the national day or whatsoever, and about the bills of the government, and they are actually wearing expensive clothes or whatsoever. This kind of circumstances will actually that make recession happen, not because of the society or whatsoever, right? And the second argument about how I told you what they principally unfair. What is the government role in the first place, and how is it justified for the government to actually push the people into the picture? Number one, Mr. Speaker, how we told you about this government fault in the first place, because the government is the one who actually made the recession happen, not because of the society. And second, Mr. Speaker, the government obligation and the government responsibility is first to solve the problem of the people, not to actually make people help you because you don't do your best to solve problem, Mr. Speaker. We think that, Mr. Speaker, in the time of recession, when all people are affected, what government has to do is actually to assist the people in recession, Mr. Speaker. Not actually to make people more burden and become more affected because of your mechanism that will affect people in the end of the day. And second, Mr. Speaker, we understand if you cannot actually solve our problem, then we understand we actually force you. But don't force us to actually help you because you don't do your best, Mr. Speaker. We think that because circumstances, if you cannot help us, we understand because you are facing a recession, but don't make us facing more harms also, right? Because they should try their best first before you actually help their people. Before that, any of you.
So you want to solve the problem by putting this country in more debt by taking loans from the IMF, and when you can actually solve the problem in our mechanism. Why so?
Mr. Speaker, we told you about the check imbalances already working in the first place. That's why that's why you didn't see any country that actually die or whatsoever people dying anywhere, because the kind of check imbalances already working in the first place, right? Even if these check imbalances are not working in the first place, we don't think that you actually put the society in the picture because society doesn't actually the one to blame in the first place, right? And second level, how we told you about the society contribution in the first place, how society already pay a lot of taxes in this kind of circumstances. Society already pay road tax or whatsoever tax that we go to the government. So we don't think that, Mr. Speaker, this kind of contribution will actually is justified for the government to actually tax them, right? And second, Mr. Speaker, how we told you about this kind of society already have natural self-incentive to not damage the economy or whatsoever. Why? Because they know that, Mr. Speaker, if we don't do this kind of particular thing that will harm the economy, then we will also be affected. So in this kind of circumstances, the people already have self-incentive and natural self-incentive to actually make sure that the government that recession won't happen on the day, because they know that if the recession really happen, then I become affected also, and the government and I will face many harms or whatsoever, right? So we think that, Mr. Speaker, that's why the society already have natural self-incentive. That's why we shouldn't push for the people, right? So summarizing my speech, what I've told you today. Number I told you today, Mr. Speaker, about the idea of recession actually come from the government, because government don't do their best, government don't try their best to stop the recession. And I also told you about the natural about the check imbalances, how they have a status quo, how, for example, they have the loan or whatsoever, and circumstances already working in the first place, Mr. Speaker. And also, thirdly, I told you about it's unfair for government to push to push the people. Why? Because we tell you the government role is actually to help the people, not to make people help you because you don't want to help yourself or whatsoever. And fourth, I told you about the society contribution. How society already have natural self incentive to actually make sure that they will maintain the economy and make sure that the economy don't spiral down or whatsoever. Without circumstances, we very proud to oppose.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, today, side opposition's idea of the recession is completely false because they're saying that recession people have the net incentive to spend or etc. etc. But recession, Madam Chair, is when people keep their money because people save their money because they are afraid to spend, right, Madam Chair? So it is a natural phenomenon, and we cannot stop recession because it is a natural phenomenon in an economy which we cannot stop, and we only can do our best to control it because it will definitely happen. So by imposing savings tax, then we can then control recession, and this will be beneficial for the economy, for the people, and for the country as a whole, right, Madam Chair? So I would like to rebut on their point that when recession occurs, countries can borrow loans from other countries. But don't you think that this will create more debt in the country, and the burden on the country is very huge. This will create a current account deficit in the country. We keep getting loans from other countries, like they say we'll get loans from Russia, and how do we expect the country to pay back that loan? For example, the US, it has a lot of debts, and if we only depend on debts, then the burden is there's a lot of there's a lot of burden on the country, and they cannot pay back the debts, and this doesn't help at all to control recession, and this even makes things worse. And if the countries will have to pay back these loans, they'll have to drain out on their foreign reserves, etc. to pay back, and this is not a good situation, not a good scenario, because there's like what I said, there's a deficit in their current account of the country. Recession will continue to exist. Therefore, borrowing money is not the solution to solve this problem. Please sit down. I'll take you later. And moving on to my first point for you today, I'm going to talk to you about the economy. So we know that in economy there are two main forces: is the supply and demand, right, Madam Chair? And this, when by imposing savings tax, we are discouraging people to spend. So we are discouraging people to save, and people will spend more. So when people spend more, the GDP of the country will grow. GDP of country will grow, and the economy of a country can be improved. Please sit down. When there's a lack of demand in a product, when people do not spend, then this will cause lack of supply as well. So let me tell you the chain here, right? When there's a lack of demand, it will not give profit incentive to the producers to produce their products, and therefore there will be a lack of supply. Firms will have to then decrease their labor force, and this will then create unemployment. This is a detrimental cycle that keeps happening, and it will make recession even worse. Unemployment rate will increase. Please sit down. Unemployment rate will increase, and recession will continue to be in a very serious state. Please sit down. And I'll give you an example. In the 1920s, the car industry was a largest factor in the economy, and when in the 1920s, the Wall Street crash happened, and people didn't want to buy cars. People didn't want to invest on cars, and this car industry was one of the main components of the economy. And when people didn't want to buy cars, the economy went down, because in this car market we raw materials, and this creates a subsidiary market. And when this is down, when people didn't want to buy, people were afraid to spend their money. They kept their money under their mattresses, and this and people didn't buy cars at all. The lack of supply created unemployment in the economy. Moving on, I would talk to you about the citizens. The citizens, as we all know, is the backbone of the society, so it is their role to contribute to sit down to the society through their work, through their jobs, and they are the driving force of economy, right? They are the driving force of economy, so only when they spend, then it will stimulate the economy to be in a better state. But so when we discourage savings, then people will then spend more, and like what we stated in our mechanism today, please sit down. Like what we stated in our mechanism today, the government will then use this money, this revenue they gain from the taxes to subsidize the prices of the products. So when these prices of products are subsidized, people now can afford things better. But before that, I'll take one.
Ma'am, if you think that when the recession happens and inflation happens and the price go up, when you take society money, they will encourage society to spend more. How will we work under your paradigm?
Because when can you please repeat?
In the time of recession, where inflation happens and the price go up, and if you take society money from themselves, how will you actually encourage them to spend more?
Like what I told you, right? Consumers have to spend, and this will then control the problem of recession and inflation, and the prices are controlled, like what we say, because through the taxing of the government, this revenue are used to control the prices, and this benefits people. People will now be living from paycheck to paycheck because their purchasing power parity is ensured. People must realize that the significance of their buying power. Buying power is very, very important to make sure that economy continues to grow. If we keep asking people to save their money, then it doesn't work at all. Their buying power is the gravity of the economy, and if they spend, this will create a better cycle. So what have I told you today? I have told you about the nature of the economy and the buying power of the citizens, right? In the economy, like what I've told you, in the economy, it is very important that producers are giving profit incentive. When people spend, they get profit incentive, and this creates producer surplus for them to continue to supply goods and ensure that unemployment rate will decrease. And I've also told you on how citizens are the backbone of the country, and they are very significant in buying things to ensure that recession doesn't occur. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No, that was really great. Definitely the proposition.
Will agree to the fact that the current recession that is happening in the UK is totally on the government's fault, right? Where the government is on fault about this recession in the UK, how will it justify to suddenly push our society to suddenly make contributions to actually make the recession become better? Firstly, because basically, my first person has told you, we already have the check and balances that we can see currently working, right? We don't necessarily see the dire need for them to suddenly impose this kind of motion on the people just to make the recession. Just to improve the economy, right? So, Mr. Speaker, firstly, I will be back your case and funds, Mr. Speaker. So we question their feasibility, right? When they actually tax people on their saving, Mr. Speaker, and they said they take money from people's saving, then what will happen? Will they actually encourage people to spend? No, because basically when your money are taken, Mr. Speaker, how are you suddenly going to spend? When your money is taken, Mr. Speaker, you will actually be more insecure, Mr. Speaker. You will actually save more, Mr. Speaker, because basically your money is now, if your money is not getting, is not taken by the government, Mr. Speaker, so they are not encouraged to spend at the end of the day. So the mechanism doesn't work at the end of the day, right, Mr. Speaker? And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, how it's like they're talking that suddenly, Mr. Speaker, the rich has the responsibility to suddenly make the price go lower just to make sure the society can buy it, Mr. Speaker. We say that this is really wrong, Mr. Speaker. In the current status quo, Mr. Speaker, we do tax the rich more than the poor, and we say that their responsibility is there, Mr. Speaker. This is totally redundant, right? Where you suddenly, when just because they have more money than others, Mr. Speaker, suddenly they are forced to buy things at high price, Mr. Speaker, just to make it better for others. We say that, Mr. Speaker, this is not justified. And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, how Mr. Speaker, they are actually forcing people to buy things that they don't need. Because basically, Mr. Speaker, during times of recession, it's not like people don't spend at all. People will still spend when they really need it, right, Mr. Speaker? People will still spend on their needs. So basically, Mr. Speaker, spending will still happen. And then, Mr. Speaker, when you actually implement this motion, Mr. Speaker, what will happen is people will actually spend on things that they need. This is really wrong, Mr. Speaker. When inflation happens and then suddenly you want to force people to buy cars, you want to force people to spend significantly more than usual, Mr. Speaker. This is really wrong. If I move on, yes.
On your idea, if these people don't spend, then the recession wouldn't happen. Do you agree that the 2008 market bust, the Great Depression, did not occur because of people not spending?
Mr. Speaker, just because they choose to spend, because it is not okay for the government to actually take their money, Mr. Speaker. We say that, Mr. Speaker, this kind of saving, Mr. Speaker, is the self-incentive kind of action, right, Mr. Speaker, where you actually, when the price are high, Mr. Speaker, how do you expect to actually spend more? Obviously, you actually spend on things that you really need, Mr. Speaker. You won't actually spend on things, you won't actually be encouraged to spend on things that is not necessarily for your life, Mr. Speaker. Because basically, when during time of recession, Mr. Speaker, everyone is having a hard time, right, Mr. Speaker. So basically, why would they actually spend money on things that they don't need? And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, how okay, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, how do you want to discourage people to save? We say that in the current status quo, Mr. Speaker, the government is actually encouraging people to save. Why? For emergency situations like during recession, right? To make sure that during time of recession, where the price actually go up high in the sky, Mr. Speaker, the society can actually still survive because of their savings. So basically, Mr. Speaker, when you say discourage them to save, Mr. Speaker, what will happen? Will they still survive in the recession? No, right? Because they have no money at all, Mr. Speaker. The government doesn't allow them to save. So how do you expect them to survive in this kind of things? And then, so yeah, moving on to my argument here, Mr. Speaker, about how the government has more capacity than the people, right? We say that, Mr. Speaker, the government is totally at fault in this kind of recession, so it's unfair to actually put the people in this kind of situation, right? And then, how we can see that the government can actually do a lot of things actually solve this kind of recession. How basically the economic activity in this Speaker is actually controlled by the government. The government controls the national budget, Mr. Speaker, so the government has more capacity to be compared to the people, right? Where people are still struggling, Mr. Speaker, because they tend to lose jobs during recession, Mr. Speaker. How do you expect them? It's totally not okay for you to actually take money from them, Mr. Speaker, when they are actually struggling to survive, when they actually lose jobs, when price get higher than usual, Mr. Speaker, and they may not be able to actually survive themselves, Mr. Speaker. So we see that, Mr. Speaker, this is unfair, because basically when the government can do something else, Mr. Speaker, why would you pull where will you pull your citizens into it, Mr. Speaker? But we say that, Mr. Speaker, just because the government doesn't want to make the government to have debt, Mr. Speaker, then suddenly it is justified for you to actually take people money. That's because you don't want the government to have debt, then suddenly you can take your people money. We say that this is really wrong, right? Because to have debt for country is really natural, Mr. Speaker. We don't see any problem with that. So I move on next.
Can you please suggest one alternative that our government can take to handle this recession problem?
Mr. Speaker, in the current status quo, we already have a lot, right? But you can actually have bailout, Mr. Speaker, and such like that, Mr. Speaker. So we say that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is unfair for the government to force the people to spend on things that they don't need, Mr. Speaker, and then suddenly they have the obligation to actually help people, right? And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, how the government, how if they implement this motion, because the government doesn't cater to the citizens. Because basically, because generally the government view things on a bigger scale compared to the society, right? Where the government tends to actually improve the education. When some of the society, Mr. Speaker, have to survive on the small matters like how do they live and such things like that, Mr. Speaker. So basically, Mr. Speaker, when a recession happens, the government interest shifts. When the government interest shifts, right? Well, they actually get self-centered, Mr. Speaker. They will then actually they won't really prioritize the citizens anymore, Mr. Speaker. Where they just focus on improving on themselves, Mr. Speaker. But we say that this is really wrong, because basically the government obligation is to cater with the people's need, not to actually improve the recession. So firstly, Mr. Speaker, they have to make sure that these people actually survive, right, Mr. Speaker. And then secondly, Mr. Speaker. And the second thing, because we say that this is not what the society wants, right? What society wants is that because they will actually survive on their own, the speaker, using their money, using the money that they save, using their intelligence before recession happens, the speaker, so then they could survive. Basically, the society obviously doesn't want this government to actually take their money that they save before the time of recession to be used during of recession, because then suddenly when recession happens, they want to take this money that they actually want to save for recession, right, Mr. Speaker? And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, how the idea of people saving money is totally redundant at the end of the day, right, Mr. Speaker? When in status quo you currently encouraging people to save money, then suddenly you want to take their money. This is totally redundant, Mr. Speaker. This is totally against the principle that the government is having right now, Mr. Speaker, where they encourage people to save, then suddenly you want to stop it. It's totally not justified. With that, I beg to oppose.
Right, thank you very much. Let's call upon the government.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by answering a POI brought up by side opposition, right? Now your question was, how does taking people's money during times of recession actually save this problem, right? Okay, for example, now you can manage to save 1,000 ringgit. My speaker told you all that we will impose maybe, let's say, about 10% charge, so now we've got 100 ringgit. That 100 ringgit will go into now our government's accounts. And let's say now we're talking on a large scale of a lot of Malaysia or any other citizens of any other country, right? So now this government has got a specific amount of money that it can use. Now, how will we use this money? We will use this money to subsidize some of other products. And when we subsidize these other products, we can now reduce the burden of these poor people, right? See, when the products, some of the causes of recession are inflation, right? So when inflation, the prices of things go up, and now we can help reduce these prices when the government subsidizes. That's how this saving taxes works, right? Now, you all came up and told us also that people will spend according to your needs, right? Ladies and gentlemen, you can be some stingy poker in one corner of the world, you can be a millionaire, but ladies and gentlemen, we will always have to buy what we need. And some of the things that we need are food, medication, and whatsoever. But ladies and gentlemen, that is not enough. What we need you to do is spend on other sorts of things, such as entertainment, such as movies. This will help gain revenue, right? So we want them to spend more, but before that.
Okay, are you actually saying that in times of recession, where they have to save money, you're forcing them to waste their money on things that they don't need?
Okay, I'll answer that question later on how this would actually help on the recession, right? Okay, next side. Opposition also brought up, right? Now governments have a chance to borrow money from IMF. They claim that it's the best alternate solution. Let me tell you how that is wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, there is recession. Our government is in need for money, and you expect them to borrow money. So now they will have taxes, they'll have interest to pay, which will induce a much bigger debt. And now with the times of recession, when they are lacking money, we want them to spend. We want the government to have more debts to pay. So you can see how there's a fraud in their system, and we believe that borrowing money during times of recession is not the best way to handle all these solutions, right? Now they also came up and told you all how the government would spend unnecessarily, for example, the national awards. Ladies and gentlemen, our government is brilliant. This is the best way. These are the things that can help save recession, right? I'll use the example on the national award, right? For example, now you have national awards such as Oscars. So now you're going to give out awards to everybody. And now, who watches these things? People from all around the world. This will gain revenue. So now there's a big income coming in. And then now you attract tourists. So now people from other countries and whatsoever will come to witness those Oscars themselves. So we are encouraging people to spend. This is why governments invest in all these kind of sort of programs and whatsoever. So now when the government has 5 ringgit, it invests that 5 ringgit so that we can get 10 ringgit. And with that 10 ringgit, that extra 5 ringgit profit that we made, we can use that to subsidize everything, right? And now, side opposition also brought up to you how they feel it's not the responsibility of the citizens to spend during times of recession, right? They feel now the rich people do not have to feel obligated to help the government in these times of recession, right? We feel they are being very selfish. Ladies and gentlemen, we are citizens of this country. It is our obligation to help our government solve these recession problems so that we can help us better and benefit our own people, right? That is why it's so important for these people to not be selfish and learn to think about those other poor people there who actually need money and whatsoever, right? And they also claim how that by taxing people, this would discourage people to spend because now things become too expensive, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I've told you all, when they spend, the now government will have extra additional amount of money to subsidize. When you subsidize, things will become low, the prices will go down. With that, people can now afford to spend more, and that is what we want. And this will also help the low-income people, and that is something I'll talk to you about more later on. And because now things are so low, the cost of things are really low, we can now afford to spend more. And on how they claim, I said, now because we lost our jobs, you want to take our money as well, right? Ladies and gentlemen, in our mechanism, we stated, if you have lost your jobs or are from low-income families, we will not charge you the saving taxes, right? Because we feel now we have our obligation as the government to help you. So now, let me tell you now how these saving taxes are even so important, right? Because during the inflation, these prices of things blew. Now people won't go for movies, they won't go McDonald's, and because of that, you cannot imply taxes. And taxes is the main revenue of our government. And without these taxes, the government cannot help us, they cannot solve problems. Because of that, now governments don't have enough money to pay all of its employers and whatsoever, which is why we need them to spend money. That is why it's so crucial. And with these saving taxes, now the government can use it to subsidize. So now those poor people who couldn't afford to pay money to even probably buy rice and whatsoever at a higher price now can buy it for a lower price. We are easing the burden of these poor people. So now, before I move on why is it so important for the average income people, and are there any POIs? Thank you for agreeing with me. Now, why on the above average people, right? See, these people have sufficient amount of money. These people are people who have high posts and are extremely important in their organizations. So these people would not actually lose their jobs during these times of recessions, as they are crucial to their companies, which is why we feel they are always able to take care of themselves. They are always able to survive during these times of recessions. And with this additional amount of money, because when the prices go up, they can afford to buy their food, their rice, their medication, and whatsoever. But now they have got a little bit more to spend, right? We feel that they said that now because of recession, people are not going to spend, even though you have enough money, you're going to be stingy. So in order to prevent this stinginess from happening, we should just help them by imposing saving taxes on them so that we can now use this money for the greater good of society, right? With that said, I'm very proud to propose.
Miss Speaker, in moral studies at school, I was told that saving up is the way to go for you to survive in the future. And suddenly the government side comes up and tells me the opposite thing, right? Okay, so here's the basic idea that the opposition comes up with. We tell you that people's interests and government's interests do not necessarily align. Why do we believe so? Because we think that people already have the self-incentive to actually save money, Mr. Speaker, because they have their own needs to meet. For example, right, Mr. Speaker, some of the Muslims, they save up their money for them to be able to go and perform Haji and stuff like that. And some of them save money to be able to pay for tertiary education and things, right? And we think that it's completely wrong for the government just because their interest doesn't align. They wanted to subsidize things instead of actually allowing these people to save things for the things that they need. They're going to take away their money. This is the sort of thing that the government isn't supposed to do, right? So that's the first flaw. So let's look on the issues into this debate. 3 different issues. Firstly, is it actually justified for us, Mr. Speaker, to put tax onto these people just because we want to discourage these people from saving? Secondly, practically, right, whether it works or not. And thirdly, the idea of harms and benefits that can come up from both proposals. So before that, let's move on to the first idea, right? Whether it's actually we'll look at the principle level first. Firstly, they talk about how it's justified because essentially people need to contribute back to the government, and it's their responsibility at the end of the day. However, the second speaker already contributed to the fact that these people are the driving workforce, right? They already contributed based on their jobs, based on their work, based on their stuff like that. So under that sense, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the citizens are already contributing to the government, and we don't necessarily see that, right, Mr. Speaker? When it's a responsibility and people have fulfilled their responsibility, it's not actually the government's place to force you onto doing something more, onto doing things that you don't want to do, Mr. Speaker. We tell you that people already have contributed based on their work, based on their jobs. So what's actually the idea coming from their side, right? What did we tell you? We told you that it's actually essentially unfair. Why? Firstly, because it's the government's fault at the end of the day. They are the ones making risky investments. We told you about Greece and Ukraine, right? How Greece actually invested a lot on their tourism and it doesn't work. And Ukraine keeps borrowing money and oil from Russia, and at the end of the day, they have to request bailouts multiple times and stuff like that. We tell you that these are the things that the government does, and it's not actually fair for us to put people into the picture when we are the ones making the risky investments, when we are the ones pulling the country into jeopardy. Okay, so that's the first idea. The second idea, practically, right? Okay, so first let's compare both proposals. What's going to happen at the end of the day? On their side, they wanted to take the people's money, so therefore they have some money in their account, right? And they're able to subsidize these things, and and the money circulation will improve because people will buy more. On the our side, we tell you that we're going to actually be able to loan to get some loans or whatever under the current checks and balances. So we still have money under our account, and we can still subsidize things, right, for people to buy, so the money circulation goes up. So we think that, right, Mr. Speaker, under this case, both proposals actually solve the problem where both of us have money, both of us can subsidize the whole thing. Please have a seat, sirs. Okay, so now with that, let's look in depth, right? Okay, so what did they tell you? They tell you that when they actually tax their savings, then it's going to discourage people from saving. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, we told you that people already spend based on their needs, and we don't want people to waste their money on things that they don't need, right? That isn't something that the government is supposed to induce. Okay, first idea. Second idea, we tell you that under economic recession, inflation, Mr. Speaker, happens, price goes up, Madam Chair. And this is a problem when the price is already high and you're forcing people to buy, when you're forcing people to spend money on things that they don't need, on things that they don't want under that state, where the prices are already skyrocketing and you expect them to buy things that are much more expensive, especially when those things aren't things that they need in the first place. Sit down, sir. Okay, the second idea, right, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that this isn't actually going to work in the first place. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because when you tax their savings, what's going to happen is that their money is going to get less, right? Because you take their money away. And then suddenly you expect them to actually waste their money more. First, the government already takes their money, and then you want them to waste their money even more. How will that system work at the end of the day? That was something that the first speaker and second speaker brought up. However, they said that, oh, you know what, people will be discouraged to save, essentially. We tell you that's not naturally the idea. The idea is that, Mr. Speaker, people don't want to lose more money than what they are already losing. So what happens when you actually make them lose money based on actually taxing their savings, then it will disencourage them to spend even more, because now they don't have the money to do so, right? Because the government already takes their money. Fourth idea, right, Mr. Speaker, where we told you that people already save for their needs, and these needs don't necessarily align with the government. So it's not actually fair for the government to force these people onto things that they don't want, especially when they're saving for the things that they need later. Before we move on, any clarifications?
Yes. under the context of Islam, it encourages its followers to help out. And I've proven to you how by implying this saving taxes, we can help out. So isn't it justified that under the context of Islam that the saving taxes can help people?
Okay, Mr. Speaker, we do tell you that these taxes can actually help people. However, we don't think that it's the government's place to actually force these people onto these things. Why do we think so, Mr. Speaker? Because we already told you that people already have their own needs. That's something that we have repeated over and over. Told you that these people have their own needs. And since it's the government is the one who's pulling the country into jeopardy, it's not actually their place to tell the people, you know what, we're going to take your money when we are the one who actually fuck up things in the first place, right? Okay, so now let's move on to the third idea, the overall harms and benefits. What did the government talk about? They talk about the idea of how now they can actually subsidize these things, right? We told you that's already achievable under our paradigm because now in both paradigms we have money. Secondly, the second benefit that they wanted to have was that they wanted the people to be able to waste their money on entertainment and stuff and things that they don't need. Okay, we think that, right, Mr. Speaker, this isn't necessarily a benefit, right? Where people actually spend more when people actually spend on things that they don't need. So that, Mr. Speaker, they don't have any money at the end of the day to be able to spend for the things that they need in the future, Mr. Speaker. And we think that that's essentially wrong. What are the harms that you brought up? Okay, firstly, we brought up the idea of how Mr. Speaker is actually very, very unfair in the first place, and it will burden the people. Firstly, secondly, we already told you that there is going to be a backlash, Mr. Speaker, where people don't essentially spend at the end of the day because money is already wasted going to the government. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, right, we told you. Thirdly, right, Mr. Speaker, we told you that now they can't actually meet their own needs and stuff like that because the government already takes away their money and they can't save, right? So summarizing our case today. First, what did we tell you? We tell you that principally it isn't justified to tax these people. Secondly, even practically, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't work. Taxing these people doesn't work. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we told you that there are a lot of harms that can come up, the backlashes that's going to happen, and that, Mr. Speaker, we've never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. By the opposition is
So the burden of proof or the government to the because is that they have to prove that it is justified to take the money from the citizens, right? But then the question is still not answered. How is suddenly because the rich people is responsible for the whole society suddenly in times of recession? Not answered. And then secondly, because how the objective is to actually make people spend. Because I told you this is happening in status quo. The objective is silently rich in the status quo because that we don't see any problem. And then secondly, because we see that it is totally wrong for the government to expect things, to expect the society to actually buy things such like cars and to watch movies and stuff like that in some recession because they tend to save money because so why not? And then what the opposition idea to them is that we say that the government is totally responsible for the recession that happens, right? And the obligation as government is that they have to actually help people. We agree that the society actually has the responsibility towards the government, and we see that this responsibility is already fulfilled in the current status quo, right? Where the people actually doing the responsibility by paying taxes because we say that because it's totally wrong for you suddenly to add some responsibility on them just because it is recession. Well, basically recession is your fault at the first place, And the second name because we question the justification that comes from. You question the justification of this motion, how do you expect people to buy things at high prices just to make things easier for others? We say that because this is totally wrong for the government to do so, and it is still not justified by the government side at the end of the day. And the second is because we question the feasibility of this motion about the effect of what will happen. We say that because their point of actually to encourage people to buy more will still not happen at the end of the day. When you actually save money and then suddenly the government take your money with the speaker, how suddenly they will get encouraged to actually buy things? Basically they are already discouraged in the first place because inflation. And the second is because the economy is struggling to actually survive with the speaker. Then suddenly when the government push them into a harder situation, then suddenly because they will be encouraged to actually spend more. We say that this is totally not happening. But in our in our opposition side, Mr. Speaker, we say that what will happen, Mr. Speaker, the government can actually solve this problem using other alternatives, Mr. Speaker. That it is not the solution can be solved in other countries because then we see that there is no dire need for the government to implement this motion. Because basically the only justification actually to implement this motion is just to make sure that the government doesn't have any debt. That we say that it is really wrong, Mr. Speaker. We say that the government in terms of the desperate, Mr. Speaker, we say that it is okay for you to actually have debt, Mr. Speaker. You can actually ask for bailout and things like that, Mr. Speaker. It is okay. And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, we say that what will happen is that the government wouldn't actually anymore cater to the citizens. We said that, Mr. Speaker, the government will push the citizen into a harder situation, Mr. Speaker. That's where is the obligation of the government goes on, Mr. Speaker. We say that the government should actually cater to the problem of these people, where they're actually trying hard to survive, Mr. Speaker, when they don't want to lose the money that they save at the first place, Mr. Speaker. Then suddenly, Mr. Speaker, the government are forcing them to buy more. We say that this is totally wrong, Mr. Speaker. The government should cater to the problem that the society are facing, Mr. Speaker, not getting self-centered and then suddenly want to solve the problem by taking the citizens' money. We say that this is totally wrong for the government to do so, Mr. Speaker. So we say that, Mr. Speaker, the opposition side today see nothing of the current status quo, Mr. Speaker, with bailout and such things, Mr. Speaker. That they felt for what's so wrong about bailouts. That's the motion falls from, Mr. Speaker. And then secondly, Mr. Speaker, how this motion, even if they are implemented, Mr. Speaker, the objective wouldn't be reached at the end of the day. So why do it, Mr. Speaker? Basically because it brings more harm than good, Mr. Speaker. So they should not implement this motion at all. With that, I beg to oppose.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, let us look at what both sides of the House today have brought to you. Let's look at both paradigms. In our paradigm, we can actually solve the problem in the economy. We can actually cater to the need of these people in a long-term basis, where we can actually prevent inflation from actually happening and thus actually create a greater good from happening throughout society. The idea of utilitarian philosophy of everyone achieving the greatest amount of happiness is achieved, Madam Chair. However, their solution to the problem is basically, oh, it's okay, just take a loan, put your country in more of a shithole than it is, Ms. Speaker. Because at the end of the day, what happens when these countries take more debt, as we can see from the US, is that their debt ceiling is constantly raised. Their debt ceiling is constantly pushed towards where it's unfeasible to actually abolish, Madam Chair. So their solution is a problem-solution mismatch. It doesn't solve the actual problem of recession occurring. Again, it doesn't solve that these people do not get what they want, Madam Chair. So let's talk about the key issues in today's debate. One of the biggest issues in today's debate that they have constantly brought up is the idea of responsibility. Who is responsible for this recession? Well, at the end of the day, Madam Chair, the government and the people, both in itself, are equally responsible. Yes, the government has taken risk in itself, but the people need to spend in order to curb these, in order to curb recession in itself, in order to actually make the economy flourish, Madam Chair. Because as we stated, these people are the economy. If you minus off the citizens, the buying power, there is no economy. So at the end of the day, we have to succumb to the idea that these people have to think outside the box, have to think of the greater good to actually make sure that their economy is maintained. It is not just the government's responsibility. At the end of the day, it is their responsibility as a citizen, due to the fact that it affects their society, their economy, their prices in products, Madam Chair. So at the end of the day, we have to we as a government don't really care about whether you spending on your needs or want. That is a thing that you have to come up to face. That is the social contract existing in our paradigm. We take away your desire to actually spend on things that you need in order to make sure your future is actually better preserved by making sure that your economy, the economy that which this country exists upon, is maintained, and make sure that prices are kept at a level in which you in the future can actually afford, rather than you save up now, but in the future where things are even more expensive, the cost of you actually saving now is actually worse than in our paradigm. So, Madam Chair, another thing that has to be acknowledged is, in times of recession, there is a dire need for change. As we can see in many recessions of the past history in itself, is that the bailouts, their solution, which is what status quo is, it is not working. It has not been working, and thus we need to see a change. And our paradigm produces this. We make a change that actually can solve the problem in itself, Madam Chair. We actually proven in an entire case where we can make sure that things like the Great Depression, the 2008 market crash do not exist in itself due to the fact that we can make sure inflation doesn't happen. We can make sure we can preserve that the economy exists. So, Madam Chair, what has side opposition and government conflicted upon? We have conflicted on the idea is that do you need to save or do you need to spend? We have shown you that we do indeed need to spend at the end of the day in order to actually benefit us as a whole, Madam Chair, in order for the greater good to be achieved, no matter what you think that you need to save. Because at the end of the day, Madam Chair, our solution is catering to the long-term future of the sustenance of these people, of the sustenance of the government in itself, and that the economy continues to thrive in the current state of recession that it is brought upon. So therefore, we from side government take this case, therefore our paradigm works. Thank you.